So in honor of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce getting engaged, let's do a background of engagement in wedding rings and how those became popularized throughout cultures. So some of the earliest wedding rings were actually found in Rome around 3rd century BCE, and they started out as iron wedding rings, and I will post a picture showing kind of what they look like. At first, gold rings were actually used for political figures such as kings, senators, stuff like that, so they weren't yet used in wedding rings. It wasn't until 2nd or 3rd century CTE in Rome that gold wedding rings were used for higher class or elite class personnel. And it symbolized financial security, prominence of their class, as well as the symbolization of their marriage. In the medieval period of India, which was around 1000 to 1500 CE, rings became common in marriages and traditions, and it was also common to also give a nose ring or a toe ring in connection with their marriage as well. Now, in modern India, around 1500 CE to today, gemstones were actually added into these wedding rings, symbolizing specific things. So rubies for love, and so on. And this was actually carried into Western Europe, of where gemstones became a more popular item. Now, after the fall of Rome is when the Christian church began using wedding rings as part of a wedding custom. At first, iron or bronze rings were used, and many people would actually do engravings. So high engravings that were used were doves, crosses, and even binding notes specific to the binding of their unity. And those would either be binded in or engraved into the front or in the inner rim of the ring as well. By the 11th century, which is around the medieval period of Western Europe, the church started recognizing wedding rings as an official item within marriage, so the official symbol per se. And they also used posy rings, which are rings that were written as poems or vows within the ring, and those were very popular also in England and France. And again, the first gemstones that were used were correlating with what sort of thing that they wanted to pronounce within them. So ruby for love, sapphire for fidelity, and later on diamonds were started to use for strength in the marriage. The first known diamond engagement ring was given around 1477 CE by Archduke Maximilian of Austria. Now, around the Renaissance period of Western Europe, around 16th century CE, gimel rings became very popular, and gimel rings were worn typically separately, and then during the marriage or at the ceremony they would be interlocking to show the interlocking of two people. And it was around this time frame too that it became popularized to use the fourth finger on your left hand, because it was known as the vein of love, or what it was known as at the time was vena amoris, which means the vein that directly runs to your heart. And around the Victorian era, around the 1800s, after the Industrial Revolution, is when it became more modernized and readily available due to the allowance of mass production of materials. So that made them more accessible to beyond the wealthy and beyond the prominent classes, and more middle class personnel were allowed to use them. It was also popular around this era to use acrostic rings, which were rings that would spell out letters with the gemstones that were used. And they would spell things like love, fidelity, small words like that within the gemstones and their meanings. And in the late 1800s, diamonds started becoming more prominent within and associated with engagement rings and wedding rings. And that's because large diamond mines were actually found in South Africa around the 1860s. And around the 1920s and the 1930s is when majority of personnel would start using wedding and engagement rings within their ceremonies, as well as interchanging them in modern day. And now in the West, in Western Europe, America, and all that, diamonds are very prominent. However, in other cultures as well, still gemstones are used, especially rubies, emeralds, as well as sapphires. So I hope you liked the little history background of why we even use engagement rings and how they came to be.